Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the London Food Network podcast. I'm Sebastian Candelon, and this show is proudly sponsored by Embrace AI Consultancy, where we help food, drink, and hospitality businesses scale smarter with strategy and automation. Today, I'm really excited actually to bring a bit of a superstar to the show. We've got Paul Shapiro, who's author of the book Clean and CEO of the Better Meat Company. Well, hello.
Hey, thanks so much, Sebastian. Great to be with you.
So tell us, Paul, who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to this?
It's very generous of you. I wrote a book. It's called Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. And that book is really the story of the entrepreneurs, the investors, and the scientists who are all racing to commercialize the world's slaughter-free meat. Now, in the process of writing that book, I learned a lot. And the book did pretty well. I was very gratified by its performance in the market when it came out in 2018. And in fact, there's a 2024 updated paperback edition as well. But when the book tour was over in 2018, I had a choice. I could continue writing about the people who I thought were going to solve this problem of how we are going to feed humanity without destroying the planet, meaning how we're going to reduce the number of animals who are being used for food. So I could keep on writing about those people, or I could just become one myself. And I ultimately chose the latter. And I decided to start the Better Meat Co., which is an ingredients company making alternative proteins through fermentation. We can talk all about that. But the basic gist of what we're trying to do is slash humanity's footprint on the planet, because raising animals for food is one of the biggest drivers of deforestation, wildlife extinction, and more. And we can do something about it by creating foods that humanity will crave to consume that take up a far, far lighter footprint.
And how do you achieve that? Because I was completely fascinated by the process and what it is. And when you think about it, I always talk to these kind of ideas and I think, why is it, it's such a no brainer, right? Protein, the amount of protein, the ease of production, relative to farming, the benefits not only to the environment, but to our health, meat can be an inflammatory, can cause all kinds of other health concerns. And then here we are. I'll let you tell the story about what it is that you actually produce.
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. Right now, we have a growing human population. There's 8.2 billion of us today. And in the next 25 years, we're going to add another 2 billion to the planet. Now, the planet is not getting any bigger. Humanity's footprint on the planet, that's getting a lot bigger, but the planet itself is remaining the same size. We're not going to farm the moon. We're not going to be farming Mars. We have one celestial body to farm, and we are desecrating it right now. As we speak, we are deforesting at very voracious paces. And the primary reason for deforestation is meat production. The number one reason for cutting down trees on Earth is to create grazing land for cattle or cropland to feed farm animals. And so the meat industry is the leading driver of wildlife extinction, deforestation, biodiversity loss, and more. And this is a real problem, but the answer is not so easy, right? Think about clean energy as an example. We need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, and so on. And the same is true with the factory farming of animals. We have to wean ourselves off of the factory farming of animals. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can grow plant-based meat, right? So taking soybeans or peas or wheat and converting them into things that taste like animal meat. Or you can grow actual animal meat, which is called cultivated meat or clean meat. That's what the topic of my book, Clean Meat, is about, which is growing actual animal cells into real meat, just divorced from the slaughter animal. And then there's a third way. And that third way is not plant, it's not animal, it's fungi. And with fungi, which is what we at the Better Meat Co. harness, I'm not talking about mushrooms. I'm talking about fungi fermentation, where you take microscopic fungi, also known as mycelium, and you grow it into a high protein ingredient that tastes delicious and is a whole food. And so you don't have to process it by fractionation, isolation, extrusion, centrifugation, all that stuff that you do with plant-based meat, you don't have to do in the case of mycelium or what's sometimes called mycoprotein. And so we at the Better Meat Co. harness the power of fermentation to grow whole food, all natural, high protein, delicious ingredients from mycelium that you can use to form the basis either of alternative meats, or you can put it directly into animal meat as well. Yeah, exactly, Sebastian. So let's say you want your sausage or your burger that you referenced. Let's say you want them to have higher protein and more fiber. You put mycelium in there, you can achieve that. You can get a better nutrition, an enhanced nutrition product. In the same way, let's say you go to a juice store and they ask you, oh, do you want to boost your smoothie with protein powder or matcha or hemp seeds, and you're willing to pay more because it's a better product, right? You're not getting the
Mm.
best smoothie, you're getting a better smoothie. The same is true here. You can make better meat by putting mycelium into meat where you get better nutritional profile, less fat, fewer calories, same or more protein, and more fiber. So it's a real benefit to the meat to do that. Or you can just use it again as an alternative meat as well and use it on its own without having to.
How do you flavor it though, Paul? Because I guess for meat eaters, the big one is obviously the flavor, but also the texture.
Yeah, so it already
Yeah.
has the texture of meat naturally. Through fermentation, we can create the texture of meat. But the flavor is just in the same way that you flavor meat, right? If you take a piece of chicken, there's not much flavor. That's why you add sauce or other flavorings to chicken to give it flavor. And the same is true here. This product absorbs what we call rhizome mycoprotein, which is the mycelium that we grow here at the Better Meat Co. Again, it's called rhizome mycoprotein. It absorbs very well any flavors, whether it's barbecue sauce, tomato sauce, anything. Like you can really use it in a versatile way.
How does it come? So, I just want to think about it from a practical term, right? So if I was to purchase some of your stuff, like how does it end up in the food chain? Can I buy it in the store? Do I use it like a minced meat and create anything I want out of it? How does it work?
You can use it as a mincemeat, but the primary use is by food companies. We are a B2B ingredients company. We're not trying to compete with the big plant-based meat companies. Frankly, we would like to sell to them, but we are not a company that you're going to see on the store shelf. We're a B2B ingredients company that food manufacturers use as an ingredient in their products.
Interesting. And I guess, Paul, because I'm very well aware of all the things you stand for, and I agree, of course. I still eat my meat, but a lot of the time is because meat alternatives, let's say in the vegan world, they are, far from natural. They're created with a longer ingredients list than I see verses on the Bible, and it kind of puts me off from going down that road because I believe that that's a big trade-off. You're trading one thing for a whole list of other things. So what can you say about mycelium and how does that fit into the kind of health sector, if you like, in terms of ingredients and
Sure. Mycelium is a all natural, whole food, single ingredient that has a naturally meat like texture and is packed with both protein and fiber. So not only is it not ultra processed, it's really not processed, right? This is a food that is a complete and total whole food. Now, at the same time, I do want to stress, let's think about how meat is produced today. Right. So if you think about, let's say, you just take chicken, since I referenced that earlier, nearly all of the chickens who are eaten, whether by Londoners or other people in the West, these are birds who have been genetically selected to grow so fast, so big, that many of them can only take a few pitiful steps before they collapse and meet their own bulk. They are raised indoors by the tens of thousands in their own feces. They never see the light of day until they're on the back of a slaughter-bound truck. And then what happens at the slaughterhouse, of course, is not something most people want to think about. And so when you think about how unnatural, inhumane, and unsustainable the current way that we produce meat is, using animal-free protein seems like a naturally preferable thing to do, especially when you also consider just how much better it is for the planet than raising animals is for the planet. Psyllium has the benefit, though, of being an all-natural whole food. And, this is not the equivalent of eating a whole food like meat. This is the equivalent of eating every part of the animal, right? With mycelium, you're eating, the equivalent would be, the skeleton, everything, right? There's no part that isn't
nose to
you.
tail, as they say, nose to tail when you eat the whole animal, right?
Yeah. So we're, with mycelium, you're eating everything. With an animal, you're only eating a small portion of it. But with mycelium, you eat the whole food. And it's packed with, again, it's a complete protein, and it's all the essential amino acids. It is packed with fiber. It's got more fiber than oats. It's got more iron than beef, more zinc than beef, more potassium than bananas. I mean, it's a true superfood, and it's all natural.
So, why is this not available everywhere? And why are
We're
we having
seeing
this conversation here and it's not actually happening everywhere around us? What's stopping it?
It should be, Sebastian. So we are scaling right now. At this time, the Better Mico has a fermentation system in California where we can produce hundreds of kilos at a time, but we need to be able to produce hundreds of thousands of kilos at a time. And so we're in the process of scaling up right now. We anticipate by the end of 2026, we're going to have much larger volumes available. So if you were in California, you could go to restaurants utilizing our product.
Oh, yeah?
There are some companies that use us as an ingredient. I'll give you an example. Oshi, which is a plant-based salmon company, makes their Oshi with our mycelium. But the volumes we produce now are just not capable of supplying the demand. We need to be producing millions of kilos, and we're nowhere near that right now.
Well, I was just reading up, by 2050, consumption of meat is projected to reach between 460 and 570 million tons. That's crazy.
Yes. I mean, the question is like, where are we going to get the land for this, right? Like, we've already deforested much of the planet in order to produce meat. So, if the numbers that you're citing, which are, of course, widely touted numbers, are anywhere near accurate, we have two options. One, deforest the rest of the planet, the little amount of forest that's remaining, or find ways to produce the meat experience for people that don't involve animals. And so, in the same way that, like, we don't want to use, most people don't want to use less electricity, right? They just want to be able to afford the electricity they have. But if we could divorce electricity from coal and oil and fossil gas, it would be a lot better. And we could continue using more and more electricity without emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The same is true. Most people don't want to eat less meat. They want to eat the meat that they like eating. But if we could give them that experience without having to raise all those animals, it would be better. Now, I'll give you an example, Sebastian. Like, right now, when you walked into the room that you're in, you probably didn't contemplate what the source of the light in the room was. You didn't think, oh, is this coming from coal or oil or wind or solar? You just were glad to have an illuminated room. And the same thing is so with meat. Most people don't eat meat thinking, oh, I'm so glad an animal was slaughtered for this, right? Most
Yeah,
people,
right.
they don't contemplate it. They don't think about it at
Yeah,
all.
you don't think about it, absolutely.
And so most people, I think, would be happy to enjoy the same experience if the alternative tasted great and was cost effective. So that is maybe not everybody. Maybe there will be some people who demand that an animal be slaughtered for them. But I think most people are happy as long as you can give them something that is tasty, safe, and affordable,
Yeah.
that they'd be happy to eat it.
I think it's kind of like education and mindset, isn't it? Because we're creatures of habit as humans, and I think most people are just so set in their ways. And I see it
Yeah.
all the time in my seafood business. People come in and they buy the same things all the time. I can propose something different but similar
Yeah.
for maybe even less cost, more sustainable. But for them to jump from the usual cod or salmon here in the UK, well, some of the biggest sellers, to jump to that is a really big ask. And I guess
Yeah.
the same problem you might find with going from meat to mycelium, which is fungi, to a lot of, especially meat eaters.
Yeah.
It's a very hard culture shift, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a good saying. I didn't come up with it, but it is a good saying that, people love innovation almost as much as they hate change, right? You know, people just, oftentimes people don't want to change. But if history is a guide, I believe that there is a lot of room for optimism here. And let me tell you why, Sebastian. Look at, for example, the way that for thousands of years we harpooned whales to light our homes. Eventually, kerosene was invented, and we had a cheaper way to light our homes. And the rise of kerosene decimated the whaling industry. And eventually, electricity decimated the kerosene industry. Look at, for example, for thousands of years, we whipped horses in order to get around. Horses were the fastest way for humans to transport anything for many thousands of years. And it was very rapid once cars were invented. Now, yes, there was some resistance to cars, or what were originally called horseless carriages, including some cities banning them because they were concerned about the horse-drawn carriage industry. But over time, it was so much better that people switched. And now it would be unfathomable to people like you or I to know somebody who used a horse for transportation or who lit their home using whale oil. Most people would never dream of doing that today, despite the fact that for millennia, that was the norm for human society. So for thousands of years, the only way we've had to get meat was out of an animal's body. Now, in the future, will we have other ways to do it more sustainably, more humanely, and more naturally? I think the answer is yes. And sure, there may be some people who resist that. But over time, I think most people will be quite happy and, in fact, relieved that we don't have to produce meat the way that we did in the past.
So, Paul, what is stopping us then? So, you're obviously one person out of 8 point something billion. You've come up with a great idea. It can solve multiple issues. And I understand you're saying scaling is the issue, but why is there not more investment? Why are there not more of Paul Shapiro's out there creating mycelium meat alternatives? I mean, it seems to me, especially in the world we live in, where people are seeking alternatives, and it's kind of like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It seems like the demand is there. So what's going on? What's happening? What are your challenges here? What's going on? Is it education? Is it funding? Is it
Yeah. So, first, I'm not sure the world needs more Paul Shapiro's, but it definitely needs more inventors and entrepreneurs, and yes, investors as well. You're hitting the nail on the head, Sebastian. Because the plant-based meat industry lately has not been doing so well. If you look at the leading players in plant-based meat today, they've really struggled in the markets, and that has led to a famine in our industry with regard to investment. Now, the Better Miko did just close a round in August of 2025, and I'm grateful for that. But there does need to be more investment in this. And, look, plant based meat has faced its challenges. The big problem for plant based meat, though, is that it is more expensive than animal based meat. Like kerosene would have never displaced whale oil if it were sold at 3 times the price of whale oil.
Of course.
And that's what we're facing right now is that plant-based meat is almost universally substantially more expensive than animal-based meat. Once that changes though, yeah, look, I'm not saying that once you reach price parity that it's the end game, but there are a lot of people who would be happy to switch at least some of the time if it were cheaper than animal-based meat. And that's the goal is how do you have innovation in the alternative meat
Mhm.
space that actually brings the cost way down? I believe that mycelium is the pathway to doing that you can actually produce mycelium in a way that you can undercut the cost of commodity meats. And that's what we're going for is a pathway to actually selling cheaper than commodity beef so that we can create a incentive for people who want to switch. Not just that it's better for them, not just that it's better for the environment or animal welfare, but also more affordable.
Well, I mean, of course, and we're all suffering in the Western world, at least, this kind of cost of living crises. It's always more difficult to introduce these kind of products in the beginning because, like you say, the problem is in order to reach a good price point in which it becomes kind of affordable, you've got to have a significant demand for it. But in order to have the demand, you need to have the production. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Pardon the pun.
And
On there.
I like the pun, so not pardon it. I favor it, and I applaud it. But I will tell you that's true. That's certainly true. We're living right now, in my view, in a world that's kind of like the electric vehicle market, like 20 years ago.
Yes.
Now EVs are rising and they're rising fast. But go back 20 years ago, it was very difficult, right? It was way less than 1% of the market. Even
Mhm.
5 or 10 years ago, it was less than 1%. And now EVs are most of the new cars that are sold in China. There are some Scandinavian countries where they're virtually all the cars being sold. And even in the US, it's rising. I think it's closer to like 10% of new vehicle sales or so in the US is electric. So I think that's right. Somebody can message me if you think I'm wrong about that, but I believe that's what I read. So anyway, the bottom line though is that it's clearly on the ascent. And even in California, they passed a law requiring that by the year 2035, that all vehicle sales will have to be electric. That's unfathomable 20 years ago, completely unfathomable.
Yeah.
And so, what's
But
going
don't
to?
you think that it's a lot of that is also to do with policy? So government stepping in
Yeah, well,
and
this.
either offering incentives and also penalties in the long term for not adopting electrical vehicle. So basically, really it seems to me that with electric vehicles, it was more, electric vehicles have been around for a long, long time, a long, long time. You've had all kinds of different combustion alternatives for a long, long time. But it wasn't really until it seems anyway that government started to actually push laws and kind of ultimatums in time to come, and at the same time incentivize. Like in the UK, there was a lot of incentives for taking electric vehicles. So is it also a case of lobbying the government
It
and trying to
is.
get support? Because surely this is of interest to the government, not just from a kind of farming crisis, food availability, but also the health aspects. Again, we live in a bit of a health crisis in the Western world. We do consume too much meat. There are many, many issues linked with your gut health and overeating certain things. And this seems to kind of solve a lot of these problems. So why is the government not getting more involved in this?
It is starting to, Sebastian. So, for example, in the United States, the Department of Defense issued a number of contracts, including to the Better Meat Co., for developing biomanufacturing in the United States. In the state of California, the last fiscal year, they had $5 million of funding for alternative protein. Now, in the budget of state of California, that's very little, but at least it's something. The same thing where you're seeing some funding now coming from the Department of Energy for these types of initiatives, the Department of Agriculture, and so on. But nowhere is there more happening in terms of government incentives than in China, where the government has
Really?
named where the government has named alternative protein one of their top 5 agricultural priorities. And so this is something that the Chinese government has been very adamant about. And what I suspect is likely going to happen now is that you're going to see a disparity between countries like the US and countries like China in the same way that we've seen disparities in, let's say, semiconductors or wind turbines or photovoltaic panels. Like right now in the United States, we import nearly all of our semiconductors from Asia. We import nearly all of our wind turbines. We can import nearly all of our solar panels from Asia. So much so that we have a whole program in the US now called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is just, and the CHIPS Act, to spend billions upon billions of dollars to try to onshore these industries. Now, it's one thing to fall behind in the race for energy or semiconductors. That's very bad. But if you fall behind in the race for affordable food, that is really bad. You don't want to be in a position where you have to import all of your food from other countries. And so my concern is that if Europe and the United States do not start really investing from a public policy perspective in the animal free protein sector, that you will see a big gulf between Asia and the West, and it will not be pretty for the West.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a hot political topic at the moment, the race at the moment. We're not just that, but technology, all kinds of different things, right, between the West and the
That's
kind of
right.
Asian and Russian economies, really, all in. Food, actually, at the end of the day, though, is the kind of basis of all human life, isn't it? So surely the priority should be on funding this rather than funding wars. But I guess that's a whole other conversation there as well.
It may be a whole other conversation, but maybe not.
Mm,
In the past, we fought wars over oil. In the future, we might be fighting wars over water, which is largely because of agriculture, right? Like, how do you grow food with far less water? Well, you stop using animals. That is the way. The biggest user of water in agriculture is not watering fruits and vegetables, right? It's watering all of the crops that are necessary to feed cattle and so on.
See, people don't think about agriculture that way. People don't realize this. And the same with antibiotics. Most antibiotics are consumed
Right.
in the animal farming industry.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Sebastian. So, over 70% of the antibiotics that are produced in the world are not for humans, they're for farmed animals. And it's not because they're getting sick and so they treat them, it's preventive because
Yeah.
these animals grow faster on antibiotics. They're raised in overcrowded, squalid conditions. And so antibiotics are helpful for preventing them from getting sick. And so that's another big problem. But, if you think about water, like a lot of the times when people are asked, what can you do to, reduce the amount of water that you're using? They'll think, oh, I can take shorter showers or water my lawn. And those may be fine things to do, but those are a minuscule fraction of the water
Yeah.
that's necessary to, grow a pound of beef, as an example. Like if you really want to reduce water, eat less meat. That's what you do. The amount of water they use in the shower is inconsequential compared to the amount of water that is used to produce the meat that people consume.
Well, that leads me on to another question, actually, which how is mycelium created in the environment in which you produce it? Like, what's the process?
Yeah.
What is the cost, if you like? Not in terms of money, but in terms of resource to create it. So for a kilo of mycelium, what's the
Yeah.
trade-off there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, we're not growing this on thin air, so you do use resources to create it, but it's a small fraction of the resources than it is to raise cows for food, as an example. So, in short, let me explain the process. We have fermenters that look like a beer fermenter, right? Look like a beer brewery, except instead of brewing beer, we are brewing protein. And so it's a different type of fermentation. But if you walked into our fermentation facility, to the untrained eye, you really wouldn't be able to tell that it wasn't just a beer brewery facility. So it looks like beer brewing, except we're brewing proteins. What happens is that we inoculate that fermenter with spores of the fungi. These are microscopic spores, and you put them in to a fermenter and you feed them basic sugars. Those spores consume the sugars and they grow. Now think about, Sebastian, a cow who you have to feed for almost 2 years before you get a steak. You have to feed a pig for 5 months before you get a pork chop. You have to feed chickens for 6 weeks before you get nuggets. In our case, we feed those little tiny spores for less than one single day, less than 1 day before they are harvested and ready for consumption. And so this is among the most efficient ways that we could ever
Just,
produce
just
food.
to understand a little bit, sorry, let me. So basically, within a day, 1 day, you can produce
Yes.
protein from just the spores mixed in with the sugars.
Yeah, so when you talk about mixing it in, it's kind of like saying you're mixing chickens and corn. The chickens eat the corn and then you eat the chicken, right?
Yeah.
The fungi eats the sugar and then we eat the fungi, right? So it's not a mixture of sugar. The sugar is the feed. They consume that. There's no residual sugar left, right? It's just like there's no corn when you eat chicken. But in this case, to answer your question directly, yes, it is less than 1 day from the time that
Wow.
we inoculate our fermenter to the time that we harvest our fermenter, less than one single day. less than a day. And so if you want to talk about efficiency, it's hard to imagine something more efficient, right?
Well, I
Yes.
can't think of anything that is grown in a day. There's no
Yeah.
vegetable, there's no fruit,
Right. So think about it this way,
there
Sebastian.
is no food that is created in that time. It's as simple as that.
Right. Yes. So think about it this way. Imagine that the larger the organism, generally speaking, the longer time to replicate. So it takes a cow a long time to make another cow. Takes pigs less time to make piglets. It takes chickens less time to make chicks. You get down to, let's say, mice, and now you're really going fast. But when you get down to the microbial level, you're not talking weeks or months, you're talking hours. And so in this case, if you can produce food, in this case from microbial fungi, you're talking hours to produce rather than weeks, months, or years. And this is how we're going to feed humanity. Like, if we want to produce more protein, more food with far fewer resources, the answer is not to go big with animal agriculture. The answer is to go small with microbial agriculture. And this is the future of food. This is it.
I mean,
Just raising more and more animals into perpetuity.
talk about fast food, Paul. I mean, that sounds like a McDonald's made in heaven.
That's not like that. That's your
I mean,
second good one. That's your second
yeah,
good one. Second and now fast food. That is really good. I like that. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to use that myself. Thank you.
I won't charge you for that, Paul. That's for you. That's my gift to you.
It's appreciated.
No, but really, I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? Really, it's especially actually in fact for the fast food industry, right? That relies on, well, I say protein, God knows what goes into a lot of the fast food meats. But if they were to invest with their big pockets in something like this and it's produced so fast, it's almost like they could actually on site have
Yeah.
their very own, production of meats, right?
Oh, that'd be fun.
That's made on demand.
Yeah. So, like, what I would imagine is a future world where you would have that, but you could also imagine something really cool, like on an individualized, decentralized way. So, for example, right now, let's say a restaurant or even you might have in your kitchen an ice cream maker or a bread maker, right? And it's almost not even remarkable. But what if you had a meat maker? What if you had your own machine where you dropped in little spores and you could make your own local artisanal meat right there on the counter in your kitchen? In the same way that a restaurant might be brewing its own IPA in the back, what
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're brewing your own meat in the back? Wouldn't that be awesome? I would
I
love
mean,
that.
it takes less than a sourdough, doesn't it? A sourdough takes longer than a day.
Yes. Yeah, and it's kind of like a sourdough in that you never have to
Yeah,
go back. Once you have that starter culture, you never have to go
yeah.
back. You keep selecting from it. So I also think about this even more broadly. Like, if you think about cosmic tourism in the future, if we ever are going to leave Earth and go for long distance space travel, you're not going to be bringing Noah's Ark in tow, right? Like, there's not going to be cows on Mars. You're going to have to grow whatever protein that you want there. And so this is the way to do it, right? There's not going to be a pathway of taking cows into the cosmos with us. We're going to be taking microbes and making protein that way. So that's useful for space travel, but it's also useful here on Earth, and we're going to make it happen.
So how can we get your product out more? So right now, so you've talked about obviously the production side of things, and obviously money is tied with that. And this is the problem with food. It's that in order to scale, you need big money, and
Yeah.
it takes time to create enough scale to make something viable in the food industry. That's just the reality of any food you create. It's
Right.
yeah, it's a high cost of production. So what is the next 6 to 12 months? What does that look like for you? What is your ultimate goal? What is your North Star exactly in this?
We are scaling as we speak. As I mentioned earlier, we just raised our round, which was a $31 million round that we raised, and we're now scaling. Our goal is to have commercial scale production available by the end of 2026. At that point, we will be selling out one large fermenter, right? So you're talking about over 1,000 tons of dry product per year. That is good. It's a good start, but it's barely scratching the surface, right? I mean, in the United States alone, there's over 100 billion pounds of meat sold every year. If you think about, let's take plant-based milk. In the U.S., plant-based milk is now at roughly 15% of the fluid milk market. So that's almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk, etc. Right?
Right.
However, plant-based meat is still languishing at 1%. And so what's it going to take? And if plant-based meat in the US is at barely 1%, that means that, you need 10 or 15x, right? It's something really, really big. So that means for us, not one big fermenter, it means dozens of big fermenters to make this. In the same way that, if you look at big ingredients today that are sold by the large ingredient companies like Cargill, ADM, Ingredion, Roquette, and so on, they have massive, massive facilities that are selling all types of commodity crops. But the difference is when you go to those companies, you can buy animal proteins or plant proteins. You can't buy fungi proteins. There's not a single company on earth that has successfully commercialized a B2B fungi protein ingredient. I'm not talking about mushrooms. I'm talking about,
Yeah,
microscopic
not really.
mycelial fungi. And in that case, we will be the first. Our goal is to become the first major ingredients provider to focus not on plant or animal proteins, but on fungi proteins. And I believe that that is what is going to help the food industry revolutionize itself to create better tasting products at more affordable prices that slash the food industry's footprint on the planet.
So I keep thinking back to what you were saying before, that growing mycelium is very similar to kind of a brewery setup.
Yeah, it is a brewery.
Maybe you've oversimplified it because I'm simple like that.
Well, yeah, it's not identical, but it is literally a brewery. We are brewing instead. We're just brewing instead of alcohol. We're brewing protein.
Well, my kind of business entrepreneurial hat comes on, and I think, oh, okay, well, just like other brewers, then surely the solution could be also just growing a community of, mycelium brewers that are placed in communities all over the world, right? I mean,
Yeah, that would be awesome. The difference is that in a beer brewery, they're usually doing an anaerobic fermentation, whereas we are typically doing an aerobic fermentation. So you do need certain things that you wouldn't otherwise have at a conventional beer brewery. There are some folks who think that you might be able to retrofit breweries today in order to make them more suitable for this type of production. I don't know. Like I think that still is to be determined. But yes, I think it could be pretty awesome to do what you're saying, Sebastian, which is that you have protein like fermentation facilities around the world and in different communities, even to the
oh,
point where
franchise opportunity here, Paul. Franchise opportunity. This is how we could expand.
I'm open to that. We hold a number of patents, and I'm quite open to the possibility of licensing that technology to people doing things in different markets from us.
Well, that's an interesting take on it, because I tell you what, the other thing I've noticed as well, the drinking culture is, very different today than it was 20 years ago when I was younger. People are not drinking as much, and actually, it could be a good time for introducing this kind of thing because of the number of breweries that are going to be probably out of business, I would imagine, in the next 10, 15 years, right?
I was actually reading about all these breweries going out of business this morning. It's interesting you should mention that. It's such a culture shift. Like, society went from having pretty high rates of smoking to now low rates of smoking. And
Yeah.
it appears that we're going from high rates of alcohol consumption to low rates of alcohol
Yeah,
consumption.
absolutely.
And that does leave a lot of stranded assets, as you're pointing out. Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of this equipment that could be used. Like it's not going to be a perfect substitution. You may have to retrofit it, but I agree.
Well, the investment might be significantly less this way. You never know, and at least the facility's already.
Yeah,
It's not just the equipment, but it's the whole infrastructure and the kind of,
that's right.
because presumably the food safety element, all the kind of compliance. I'm sure is different, but at the same time, anything in food has to follow compliance of some sort.
That's right. They're still going to have a HACCP plan. They're still going to have
Mm,
food safety requirements. It's not that they're going to be a perfect swap in, but I agree with you that it's possible it would be a lower capex in order to convert.
interesting. And in your dream world, Paul, I can probably guess what this would be the answer to, but how does the world look like in 10 years' time for you in an ideal world?
Yeah, I think in the past, protein or meat has typically meant a hunk of flesh from a slaughtered animal's body. Those are almost synonymous, right? In the future, we're going to have a far more diverse definition of what meat is. We're going to have meat coming probably still from animals, but also meat coming from plants, from cell culture, from fermentation, maybe from something that we don't even know about yet.
Mm.
I think people are not going to give up their meat tooth, so to speak, right? Humans crave meat. We're not going to give that up. But just, we also really like having a high electricity lifestyle. and we're not going to give up on electricity, but we are going to get our electricity from cleaner sources. And I think the same is true with meat. We're going to get our meat from cleaner sources, which means non-animal sources. Now, again, it's not to say that you're going to see an end to all animal raising. I mean, even today, more than a century after horses were displaced by cars, I still see horses being used in the streets sometimes, whether for tourists, ever. So, I'm not saying it's a total displacement, but if you think about the number of animals who we raise for food today, that number needs to drop. And it needs to drop precipitously in order to meet the goals that are necessary to meet from public health, animal welfare, and environmental perspective. As a result, we will not reduce the amount of protein we're eating, but we're going to be getting protein from a more diverse set of ingredients.
And let's go back to how long has it been when did you first establish
I
the Better
started,
Meat
yeah, I
Co?
started the Better Miko in 2018. So it's
It's
7
still
years in.
fairly new in the world of business.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine it's been a very interesting journey. And I often ask business owners, you must remember a particular moment. What's been your biggest win? Let's start with that. What's made you feel most proud of what you've started? Has there ever been a moment where you've really just stood on your mountaintop and realized, wow, this is
Yeah, I think building our first 3-story tall fermentation system, inoculating it and seeing it work. That was among the most exciting moments for me because everything we had done had been a kind of smaller lab, small pilot scale to see, does this even grow, right? Like, we're trying to introduce a novel crop to humanity, something that is not been farmed before. It's almost like imagine if you discovered wheat and you were the first person to ever cultivate wheat and you planted your first field, you'd grown it in like a little plot and now you planted it in a field and you want to see, does this thing work? So the first time that we ever inoculated our 3-story tall fermenter, we anticipated it would take probably like 2 days before the fermentation would be complete. In actuality, it took 1 day. And so we were rushing because we weren't ready to harvest it, right? We weren't even ready. And so we had to cool the fermentation down to halt it in order to get ready because in order to even get ready to harvest. And so that was one of the biggest revelations for us, right? That not only were we sitting on a really valuable new crop for humanity, but that this really might even be more efficient than we were projecting.
And another question really is because kind of goes hand in hand with the success of your business. And we all, as business owners, have had these kind of moments where we question our life choices. I'm always curious, what's been your worst kind of what the heck am I doing moment? And what happened and what did you do about it and how did you get through it?
I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you, Sebastian. We were sued and spent 3 years in intellectual property litigation over our patents.
Wow.
We won. The judge
Jesus.
in the yeah, there was a federal judge in the case ruled that all of the patents in dispute belong to the Better Meat Co. So it was a good outcome for us and from a legal perspective. But that was 3 years of wasted resources, wasted time. That
Wow.
was just a real, I should say, it reduced our welfare substantially. And it made us it made us more unattractive to investors. It prevented us from scaling. And it was
Oh, what a shame. What a
yeah,
shame.
I agree. I agree. But that's all behind us. Had a favorable outcome for us, and we're moving on. So I don't sit around thinking about it. I mainly think about how we can succeed today, rather than lamenting the woes of our past. But since you ask, I would say that was the lowest point for us was that process.
Well, I mean, the fact that you've just made that still somehow so positive, Paul. I love your character. I love you've got a great character, and I think that's going to lead to all kinds of success for you for sure. You've already done incredible things, and I think you should be really proud of yourself. I think it's amazing to be such a pioneer or something that's clearly so beneficial to not just humanity, but obviously to all the animals that
Yeah.
are giving their lives for feeding us.
Well, I really appreciate that, Sebastian. It's very kind of you. I think the mistreatment of animals is something that I feel very personally and deeply about. And I hope that we can create a world where animals are treated more kindly and where we subject them to the types of torment that we do today. At the same time, my number one goal is creating a company that can be profitable on its own without further investment, that can actually make a dent in the problem that we're trying to solve, as opposed to having a niche product that is available in some minuscule part of the market. We want to create a new commodity ingredient that can actually make a dent in the number of animals we're used for food. And so the benefit to animal welfare and public health is a side effect of what we're doing, but we need a scale. And that's what we're focused on. And I feel an enormous amount of gratitude to be able to work with people who, one, are a lot smarter than I am, and two, are very dedicated, right? We have a very great team of people who are working to invent this technology. I may be the face of the company. I'll tell you, Sebastian, I'm not the brain of the company, right? Many better
You
brains
can't
than
be everything, Paul. You can't be everything.
yeah, right. There's plenty of much better brains here than mine, and I'm grateful. I always say whenever anybody asks what's the secret to success, to the extent that I've had any success, it's by surrounding myself with people who are a lot smarter than I am.
I'm sure they'll be very pleased to hear that. Paul, I have to ask you, because it's been nagging me and I'm sure it's going to nag the listeners. Are you a vegetarian or do you still eat meat?
I am a yeah, no, let it nag. Don't let it nag, Sebastian. You can ask anything.
It's been,
Yeah, I became yeah, no, I became a vegetarian 32 years ago. Uh,
wow, Jesus.
I've been very happy to not eat animals for a long time, and it would be great if more people would make that decision. The world's going in the opposite direction, though. Meat demand is going up, not down. So we need to find ways that can satiate humanity's meat tooth in ways that are delicious and cost effective, and that's why I'm doing this. If people wanted to switch to eat more bean and rice burritos and lentil soup and hummus wraps, I'd be thrilled. But it looks like people want meat. It's kind of like saying, if people walked and bike more, it would be great. But people want to drive, right? So that's why we got to make electric. So I'd be delighted if more people wanted to do what I do. But I have learned that the world wants meat. That's just all there is to it. I wish that weren't true, but it is
Yeah.
sadly the reality.
To all the listeners out there, how can we support you in this? Where can we find you? What do we need to do to kind of like help in our way, however insignificant?
Well, that's so nice of you, Sebastian. You can visit us if you're interested in our company. The website is bettermeat.co. Again, bettermeat.co. If you want to read my book, you can get it again anywhere books are sold, Amazon, anywhere else. But again, the book is called Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. And I'd love to hear from you. If you want to partner with us, let me know.
Well, great. I think there's been an incredible amount of food for thought there, or mycelium for thought there. Paul, really appreciate your time. And to all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it, and give it some love. We'll be back soon with more founders and incredible stories from around the world of food and hospitality. Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate you coming.
Thanks, Sebastian. I'm going to use fast food.